Hey, everybody. Welcome to your asynchronous lesson for the week. We have a decent amount to get through today, so I'm going to get going right away and just say this is probably going to be the end of the progressive era for this unit. I might touch on it a little bit during our class next week, but this is going to be the last of the big content that you need both to sort of add some context to what we've been talking about and then also for your assessment. So um, thinking about 10 or 15 minutes for the video. It's a little on the longer side, but I'll get through it as quickly as I can. We've talked a bit about sort of generally how the progressive era starts. Generally speaking, there was a lot of inequality during the Gilded Age. A lot of people were not being treated right. Very rich people were getting richer. People were suffering for it. We had issues with urbanization, a whole bunch of stuff. There's a couple other things we can point to that are going to really factor into why the progressive era looks the way that it does. We'll talk briefly about the role that women play. It might sound familiar to you. It's similar to what we talked about during the era of good feeling, era of good feelings. I don't know why I always want to make that singular. Women are going to play an outsized role in sort of spearheading the progressive era. We'll talk really briefly about Western states, their role in things, and then conservationism as well. So women in the progressive era, they're still not treated as equals in America, still don't have the right to vote during most of our progressive era. They, in most places, in most cases, don't have the right to own property, and they're not allowed to be educated for certain jobs. Women are going to really spearhead the progressive era because with all of these limitations, they're going to see the progressive era, they're going to see this social reform stuff as a way to make their lives better, to improve their communities, improve their lives, break out of their traditional roles. They're going to find things that they can do, possibly because of all the things that they can't do, and really sort of get involved in that way. They're involved in a lot of stuff. We're just going to focus on one, temperance. So temperance is abstinence from alcohol. Generally speaking, the argument for temperance is not drinking shows restraint. It shows you're in control of your life. Or the other argument would be like, there's just social problems. It really hurts society when alcohol is available. Specific to women, the arguments are going to look a lot like this. They're going to talk about domestic neglect and abuse, husbands that are going out and getting drunk, that are being abusive, that are ignoring their wives. They're going to talk about infidelity. So drunk husbands out like cheating. They're going to talk about disease, which comes along with the infidelity. And they'll talk about like lost wages. My husband went out and spent his entire paycheck on alcohol. That makes my life worse. Therefore, alcohol should not be something that people consume. Western states are also going to be a big part of the progressive movement because they come along later and they sort of evolve more democratically than a lot of these Eastern states. Western states are the first to allow public initiatives, recalls, and referendums, allow citizens to create laws by petitioning to have an issue placed on the state ballot and allowing voters, not politicians, to decide. So this is an initiative. You create a petition as a person, you get enough signatures, it goes on the state ballot, people vote on it, and then it becomes a law. You don't have to have any politicians involved. Referendums are similar, except they're in response to something that's already a law. So you might have a referendum to change a law or to undo a law that's on the books, but it's the same process. And then recalls allow citizens to oust elected officials between elections, essentially. California introduces all of this in 1911 to give citizens a more direct role in the laws they have to abide by. We talked about that this week, right? Progressivism being about giving voters, giving citizens a direct role in laws. Last one, really briefly, is conservation in the progressive era. So prior to the progressive era, natural land is often not always, seen as nothing more than a resource to be used for industry. Roosevelt begins the United States' first environmental conservation program. Government's going to protect almost 200 million acres of land. This is where we get our national parks, our national forests from, and also reclamation services. So the government is going to basically protect or control oil, trees, coal, things like that, stopping companies from just destroying all of nature in an effort to make a profit. If you're curious, this is Henry David Thoreau. His book was influential to me when I was younger. This is, I can't think of who this is right now. If you want to know, ask me during class. I'll figure it out between now and then. So achievements of the progressive era. During your group work this week, you looked at these arguments, the arguments that would end up being our progressive amendments. So here they are on paper or on screen. 16th Amendment establishes an income tax. You saw the arguments for that, but government taxes people based on the amount of money they make. This is going to remove burdens of tariffs, so of just taxing goods from poor people. It's going to be more equitable. It's going to tax rich people more. It's going to be more progressive, just as we talked about. 17th Amendment is the amendment that leads to the direct election of senators. It allows for regular citizens to elect their representative rather than before when states decided who the senators were going to be. 18th Amendment, the only amendment that ever was rescinded, prohibits the manufacture and sale of alcohol. I believe it's the 21st, although I could be wrong, is the amendment that says, just kidding, let's ignore the 18th Amendment and bring alcohol back. In case you're looking at this and wondering why we have alcohol in this country, it's because we changed our minds pretty quickly, as a matter of fact. 19th Amendment prohibits the denial of the right to vote based on sex. This is our suffrage amendment. This is the amendment that gives women the right to vote in 1919. Couple other achievements of the progressive era. We do see some worker protection. We don't see a minimum wage yet. That's not going to come about until the 30s, but we see 40-hour work weeks, the 8-hour work days, pretty similar to what we have today. And then we see some child labor laws, a lot looser than they are today, but at least some laws starting to say, like, maybe we shouldn't have 5-year-old kids working, you know, I don't want to do the math, 100 hours a week or something like that. We see the achievement of some consumer protection. So the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 says, like, y'all stop selling garbage and telling people it's medicine. And then antitrust enforcement. This is going to be the government starting to look at and potentially break up companies that are using integration, which we talked about last unit, to gain too much power. So there's going to be actually some actions against our Rockefellers and our Carnegies and the like, who just have a tremendous amount of power in the marketplace prior to that. I'll close up by saying it's not all good. Progressivism has a lot of benefits, but there's some sort of flip side to it. We'll talk about that a little bit next week. Giving voters more power can get really messy. You can decide if you like it or not, but California has one of the longest, not just state constitutions, one of the longest constitutions in the world. The California state constitution is longer than a whole bunch of countries' constitutions. Because of initiatives, because of referendums. Initiatives and referendums make ballots long and confusing. So instead of just voting for a handful of elected officials, it's not uncommon to see like 15 or 20 actual laws on the ballot. Record is 48. So if you can imagine a ballot that's got like maybe 6 to 10 people that you're voting on, like in an election. And then on top of that, not only do you have to decide between 10 different elected seats, you have to look at 48 different laws. Obviously, that's confusing. discourages voting in some ways. And then finally, recalls. So a recall election, I think I mentioned this in class, is in between the elections of an official. If you don't like the job they're doing, not if they commit a crime, specifically if you don't like it, you can create a petition. If enough people sign the petition, then you can have a vote to decide whether to kick that person out of office. In 108 years in California, there have been 178 attempts to remove an elected official in California via recall, 55 recalls for governors. That means that 55 times in 108 years, people have tried to kick out governors just because they didn't like the job they were doing. That averages out to more than 3 recalls per governor that we've had in that period. And then sort of the big one, eugenics. So progressivism argues that we should make society better. One way that people start to think we should make society better is to say, like, what if we just make babies stronger? So they start to have this idea that we can actually match 2 physically and mentally fit people, and then they're going to have kids that are more physically and mentally fit. And you do that over generations, and you create a race of people or a society of people that are superior. That snowballs really quickly to, like, what if we stop mentally ill people from being allowed to have babies by sterilizing them? Escalates really quickly to, I don't know how to say this word, even though I should, but this is interracial relationships. So there are laws that the US implements that says a Black man and a white woman, or a Black woman and a white man, or any sort of mix of race of people are not allowed to have babies because they wouldn't be part of the superior race. Social Darwinism is part of this, the idea that we're like evolving to make ourselves better. It becomes popular in the 1900s. It's generally really racist, as you can imagine. There's a lot of, hints of like Hitler, Nazism, greatest race, superior race stuff in there. But even W.E.B. Du Bois said only fit Blacks should procreate to eradicate the racist heritage or moral iniquities. Not awesome. Social mobility becomes a part of the eugenics conversation. So upper class women are encouraged to have more babies. By extension, non-upper class women are sterilized. They're forced to have abortions if society, quote unquote, determines their genes are not desirable. Eugenics is big. Carnegie Institute gives a bunch of money from it. Rockefeller gives a bunch of money from it. Harriman, railroad fortune. So they're getting a whole bunch of money to look into this. And then we have the sort of big birth control movement, right? This is better than sterilization to say, if people use birth control, maybe that could help with the idea of eugenics, but still not great. Really, the whole point of eugenics is make society better by making sure any babies that society has are superior and preventing the quote unquote non-superior folks from having kids. Sorry to end on such a downer note. Here's one more, I guess slightly less downer. Imperialism. So welfare, making people's lives better, progressive ideas, leads directly to imperialism because progressivism talks about making people's lives better. Progressivism is an American idea, so we can substitute the word people here. Well, not just an American idea, but in the context of our US history class, it's an American idea. So we can substitute the word people with the word American, right? Imperialism means better, cheaper access to goods. Better, cheaper access to goods is good for people, but specifically Americans. Imperialism means protection, feeling safe. Oh, sorry about that. Feeling safe is good for people, but American lives. So progressivism in America, the idea of the welfare of Americans, is inevitably going to start to butt heads with the rest of the world. Why is it not all good? Last week we talked about two big ideas. Government should be strong so it can take care of the welfare of the citizens, and that more democracy, people having a say in who runs things, is better. Seems good. We'll talk about how this goes wrong next week. I'm going to leave you with this image to maybe start your brain thinking a little bit. And that's that. I'll see you all in class next week.